and your coffee, come on in. If you're in here already, feel free to take the Brain Warm-Up American History quiz. I will give you the answers. Go ahead and fill that out to the best of your ability. This will not qualify or disqualify your citizenship, don't worry. All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and start because we have a little bit of cleanup from last week and then jump into the topic for this week. That being said, a lot of what we're talking about will then be revisited again because the two different Lutheran Hour series that Pastor Toby's kind of crafted our Bible study around, they dovetail a little bit, which I think is good because there's a lot to dissect and take in both concepts, both topics and series. So to start, I'm going to go ahead. So per discussion, there's a lot that influences our discussions of church and state, and there may be some where I might just say that doesn't apply right now. For the sake of, I really want to narrow our focus on the relationship between the church and the state, because I'm sure all of us have various issues we could take with the state. Or with the church, but I really want to look at that intersection rather than just the issues on one side or the other. So just to kind of let you know ahead of time. It's not that those aren't valid issues or opportunities for conversation, just that might be the setting for now in this particular focus. So I'm going to go ahead and start. I want to show you the rest of the video that we didn't get to last week.
Luther's concept of the two kingdoms that later informs the system developed by the founding fathers for negotiating the intersection between church and state. Our nation's founders struggled to find a way to prevent a collision between church and state. What they came up with was an incredibly intuitive solution, one that would bind the federal government to very limited powers, and one that would guard the freedom of the individual self-governing citizens. It was established on a foundation of reason, a morality evident in the laws of nature or natural law, and a morality informed by religious values.
The American founders looked to religion and a morality informed by religious values to promote the kind of social order and stability that they need. They believe religion's going to provide that internal moral compass that will prompt citizens to behave in a disciplined fashion. And this is an idea that is expressed over and over again in the political literature of the American founding.
You have, for instance, Adams saying, our particular form of constitutional democracy can only work with a religious and moral people.
Throughout history, presidents, congressmen, senators, the leaders of our country in both the public and private sector have been men and women of faith.
And for the Founding Fathers, even the morality of the limited state was underpinned by common sense, the morality seen in creation and their religious beliefs, many which were compatible with Christianity.
Jefferson, in fact, while he rejected miracles of Jesus, rejected the sacraments, etc., Jefferson took a Bible, he took several Bibles, by the way, and he took a penknife and he cut out all those parts of the Bible that he thought were mythology. And so, of course, any divine claims by Jesus, the sacraments, etc., all gone. But what remained was the moral teaching of Jesus. But Jefferson believed there was an enduring moral standard, and all of our founding fathers did.
Religion played a vital, indeed I would say an essential role in this regime of political self-government that they envisioned, that they were hoping to establish in these United States.
No one expresses this idea more clearly than George Washington in his famous farewell address in 1796, in which he says, "Of all the habits and dispositions which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports."
Now what's interesting, he goes on to say in the very next sentence, he says, "In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these firmest props of human happiness." Now think about that. He's saying, if you're laboring to undermine this public role for religion, you can't call yourself a patriot. Because again, he starts from the proposition that religion and morality are indispensable to a regime of republican self-government.
A key factor in successfully navigating the intersection of church and state is allowing for religious reasoning to be a part of the public discourse. All citizens of the United States have the right to be engaged in respectful public discourse. But it's impossible to come into the public square and leave your religious convictions behind an artificially erected wall.
You know, I would argue that people of faith must be afforded the opportunity to engage in debate in the marketplace of ideas. That is fundamental to a democratic society. It's important that citizens be allowed to confront, to hear, and engage ideas from a variety of perspectives.
Most of us understand part of the founding of the United States, why people came here from other shores, was the freedom to practice their religion, the way they understood the religion to be. And that's one of the things, frankly, that makes the United States so wonderful, is that we are able to have, we don't have a theocracy, we have a multiplicity of religions, many of whom I don't even understand or know that much about, but I certainly believe in their right to practice them.
Yeah, it's important for loyal, faithful Christians who are also citizens of two kingdoms, citizens of the kingdom that is created at baptism, and then citizens also of this kingdom called the United States of America. It is really necessary for those citizens to be active in their local and federal government.
The error of assuming that I don't have a responsibility for this realm is an error. You can even say a heresy, because if you get the distinction right between the two realms, it's easy to see that, yes, I have a responsibility in the left hand, and there's no way I can be quiet. I need to be active.
And we undermine our democratic values when we say you can come to public debates and bring your political ideas, your ideological ideas, but you can't bring your religious ideas.
The church, especially the Christian church and the Christian worldview, has played a significant part in contributing to the social conscience of America. a conscience that has allowed democracy to thrive and provide religious liberty to people of all faiths.
All right. Make sense? Problem solved. We're dismissed, right? Some things to take away from that, because there's a lot. And I just want to recap real quick so we can move into what we're going to cover today. Religion and morality. So I'll probably look at it this way. So keep in mind we talked about the left hand and right hand, right? The way you're looking at it, left hand, right hand. And you have both the realm where the God can work through governmental systems, and this is not unique to the United States because this is a mindset that the Apostle Paul has as we look in Acts 26. But God is also working through the church, and there's works that he does, but these aren't disconnected from each other. They're not divorced, but they are distinct. At the same time, you have a cooperation between the two without them getting commingled and confused. And the way that, to kind of summarize what you saw within the founding of the nation, was them understanding we have people that have come to the shores of these colonies that come from different denominational backgrounds. And they saw the initial conflict, which is what we looked at last week, of certain denominations saying, no, to be in this state, you have to be. I mean, to the point of one woman was killed because she was a Quaker. I mean, if you really boil it down, it's like, that's insane. It's crazy. I mean, bring it into the present day, that'd be like, oh, I'm sorry, you're in Minnesota and you're not a Lutheran? String them up. It's nuts. But what they saw, and here's what I hope you caught, because it was said in several different ways. Independent, self-governing, moral people. They set the country up. It's like the country was set up with the laws and the Constitution like a fence in which all the children got to play, regardless of what family they came from. And if some kids wanted to jump the fence, they said, no, you can't do this because this is for your protection. And there are certain laws that dictate how you get to play together. But the Constitution wasn't meant to be a leash where it's like, shunk, it jerks you, and that's what the limit is. There's more movement. That was the original intent. Understanding that they were going to be independent, self-governing, moral. What we see, though, is, and this would be probably any form of government, to be held morally accountable is uncomfortable. That means we have to admit that we're wrong. And if we admit that we're wrong, then maybe we're weak. And if we're weak, maybe we shouldn't be in power. But I want to be in power, so I can't admit that I'm weak or that I'm wrong, so don't tell me what's right or wrong. Follow me? There's fear in that response. So what happens is then when you feel an uncomfortable influence, you just want to cut it out all the same. So a lot where we might see where we've seen the church's voice silenced, and we could get into specifics, but don't have the time for all of it, might then be, well, if you silence the church, then you're silencing the very engine that is helping produce independent, self-governing, moral people. And you can't legislate morality. You can't legislate morality. Just because you put a speed limit up doesn't mean everyone's going to follow it. Just because a teacher says to one student, don't do this to the other, automatically, that does not equate to the student never doing that again. That's an issue of the heart. And guess what? The left-hand realm is not concerned with the issues of the heart. That transformation happens in the right-hand realm. Now, does that mean that has no impact on the left hand? No. Remember, there's a cooperation and an influence of the two. So to wrap it up, in what ways do we undermine our democratic values when we fail to bring our morality into public debate? What do you think? What ways do we undermine our democratic values when we fail to bring our morality into the debate? Tim? Our debt. Explain how debt with our morality, debt and morality. Explain how those are connected.
Well, in the late 1700s, and during the 1700s, Quakers came here, and then Lutherans, Baptists, the Anglicans, the Puritans, the Catholics.
Saw the denominations coming in the 1700s.
Then with Thomas Jefferson, Washington,
Mm-hmm.
And Dwight was here too. It's Theodore Dwight.
Theodore Dwight, okay.
And he said that basically that the death that we had occurred in the Revolutionary War would be the ruination of our sons and daughters.
Mm-hmm. So debt would be a problem for generations to come.
We had blockheads and knaves here. And the ties of marriage and all its felicity are severed and destroyed. Our wives and daughters are thrown into the streets, and our children are cast into the world.
For the sake of time, Tim, can I have you make it a little more concise?
Well, I made it more concise by saying it's the ruination.
So the taxation I'm wondering how it relates to this question though with like morality. How would our morality speak to, how does it, so back to the question, in what ways do we undermine our democratic values when we fail to bring our morality into public debate? So I hear you raising an issue for public debate, but how does our morality speak to public debate? Say what? Oh, say, okay, for crime, so speaking to how we deal with such situations? Warm? War. Okay, so war, if we don't raise in terms of is this, oh man, this gets into just war debate. That's true. Well, okay, I know, Tim, but I need to keep the conversation within the context that the question is asking for. So not just governmental issues, but where do we fail if we don't speak morally into? So there might be many issues we could speak into, but what happens if we never do? Carolyn. So some of this would be if our morality, we don't see that as a factor when we vote, when you look at certain candidates and what they stand for. And actually, if you haven't figured it out yet, this series is going to end the Sunday before election. Yes, that was intentional. Because we need to think about these things. Otherwise, it becomes way too easy to be like, well, that's my party, that's how I vote. Pretty sure you'd find a couple founding fathers that would want to call you, as Tim said, a blockhead or a knave, if that's the type of voting. Because there's more to it than that, in light of the fact that our primary citizenship is as a child of God. How then does that factor? Because our allegiance is not to a governmental party. Because guess what? You're going to be a child of God, even if for some reason, let's say you get exiled to Pakistan. You're still a child of God. That's one thing that's really hard for us when you live your entire life within one country, that you have a hard time understanding your sense, your essence outside of that citizenship. And it's not bad that that's included, but that cannot be your primary understanding of who you are. Otherwise, you have nothing to bring to this discussion. I'm really adamant about that because it's a huge lie, and some churches perpetuate it. We have to be more mindful, and we get to be more mindful. That's how the system was set up to operate. Dennis, did you have something? Sorry, I saw your hand go up.
I was going to say, if you don't defend your morality, pretty soon your morality will be legislated out.
So if you don't defend your morality could be legislated out if there's no voice to speak to it. That's the danger that we have. I mean, we get to speak. And you get to speak without being a crazy on a street corner. That doesn't mean you can't stand on a street corner, but you don't stand on a street corner without being belligerent. Anger is hard to deal with. Since how could we be the conscience of the nation today? I loved that concept that came out of the video. Because the conscience speaks too, when we talk about, I'll even use a horrible example, Jiminy Cricket. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, there's a new Pinocchio. You can figure it out that way too. The conscience speaks to a larger whole. But it speaks the truth, and for us, understanding like this absolute truth, that's what speaks to and what informs our morality. And if we have doors and opportunities to speak to that and say, this is not right, that's why the whole system is set up. Now, we could say the various ways that the system's corrupted and broken. Well, it's run by human beings. But that doesn't mean, like, we don't speak. Now, to that, I'm going to go into this. So if you have not yet, take a look at your sheet. Your quiz, I would invite you to take it real quick if you haven't yet already. So I'll give you, what's an anxiety-producing time? A minute? What's going to give me enough time to see if the Packers are ahead or behind right now? I won't do that. My watch won't tell me that. Say what? Don't tell me. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Go ahead and take a couple minutes. Just give it your best shot. What you think the answers are, just circle it. I won't be grading your papers. Consider it maybe more a self-assessment. And some of these questions you might be thinking, I have no idea. I don't know if I've ever even learned that. That's okay. What all these questions deal with is the whole idea of, are we a Christian nation? So if you're really bored and you're thinking, my relatives are coming over for Thanksgiving, I just gave you a topic to talk about if you want. You can decide if you want to talk about it before or after you eat, whether you need to stress eat or whatever. All right, let's go through them. So first one, when did the phrase "In God We Trust" first appear on American currency? 1793, 1864, 1883, or 1956? First appeared in 1864. So this is towards the end of the Civil War. It first appeared on a 2-cent piece. In case one is like, I need to know this, that the video that follows this will also go over a lot of this. Where did the phrase "In God We Trust" and its correlation to the United States originate? The Declaration of Independence, the poem "The Defense of Fort McHenry," President Washington's inaugural address, or President Adams' devotional journal? B, the defense of Fort McHenry. Does anybody know what this is also known as? The Star-Spangled Banner. It appears in verse 4. Did you know there were 4 verses? I only know 1. What year was that? Oh, I don't know. You got me there. The teacher is being schooled. All right, the next one. The motto of the United States. The motto of the United States is "One Nation Under God." When did this act of Congress take place? So when did Congress vote to make this our motto? 1776, 1788, 1872, or 1956? 1776 was the Declaration of Independence. 1788 was the Constitution. 1872 is just a date I made up. It's actually 1956. So it wasn't our official motto until 1956. I want you to hold on to that, along with this next question, then I'll speak to that in a moment. When was "One Nation Under God" inserted into the Pledge of Allegiance? 1784, 1814, 1892, or 1954? 1784, we didn't even have the Constitution set yet. It's about the time Revolutionary War was wrapping up. 1814, we took a little trip along with Colonel Jackson down the mighty Mississippi. So that's why I put that date in there, because the song was in my head. In 1892 was when the Pledge of Allegiance was written. It was in 1892. It's actually 1954. Now keep in mind, so it came into the pledge in 1954. It entered as our official motto in 1956. What was currently going on internationally at that time with the United States? The Cold War. Against who? Soviet Russia. And Soviet Russia operated under what type of government? Communism. And communism said there is no. So the United States thought this would be a great way to differentiate ourselves from the communists. A lot of church growth, and I've read this in several documents, not only like theologians, but also sociologists. There's a huge, huge influx in church growth during the 50s and 60s because if you didn't go to church, you must be a communist. Think about it. The Red Scare, you had a lot going on where it was just like, there was a huge amount of patriotism because you had to differentiate yourself from the other world power because everyone was fearing a gigantic intergalactic nuclear conflict. So it's like, no, I'm not a communist. I go to church. Great, so you go in church. Are you a Christian though? I'm not saying this is the only influence. And was God growing the church? Of course he was. I'm not downplaying the work of the Spirit either, but I think we need to keep in mind all the other forces, all the other influences that are going on at this time. Because keep in mind, this wasn't until the 50s that a lot of public, you could almost even say legislated, we are Christian, came into being. Before that, it might have operated off of assumption, or the system allowed it to take place, and everyone was like, okay, fine. More. The federal document states, so what federal document states? The government of the United States of America is not, in any sense, founded on the Christian religion. The Treaty of Tripoli in 1797, the Monroe Doctrine in 1823, the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, or Roe v. Wade in 1973. I feel really sorry I even put this one on here because it's really, really, you have to be like a history nerd beyond history nerd. It's actually the Treaty of Tripoli in 1797. So keep that in mind. We just spent time talking, timeline, 1950s. This is way back 1797. So I'd say there's an intentional move to not be labeled as such, while as here, there's a move to not want to be labeled as godless. So you can't just say, well, people are divorced. I mean, this is 1797. This is not 1997. So the whole idea was like, what do you mean we're not a Christian nation? Right there. Treaty of Tripoli. A lot closer to some people say, well, if we were just the way our country was founded, this is pretty darn close to when the country was founded, don't you think? I mean, this is 9 years after the Constitution was ratified. Our country's a whole whopping 21 years old right now, barely an adult. And there's always this understanding of, okay, there are Christians that make up this country, but I don't know if we want that label. And this goes to what, I can't remember his first name, but it was O'Malley, who's the president of, I think, Catholic Services in St. Louis. He mentioned this, that we're not a theocracy. A theocracy is a governmental system that is directed solely by a religious system of belief. This would be like Iran right now. It's a Muslim nation. That's not how we were set up. That's not how we were intended to be set up. And to be really crass about it, for followers of Jesus, we're followers of Jesus wherever we go. Theocracy, democracy, republic, dictatorship, fascism, communism, doesn't matter. Because our primary identity is as children of God. How we express that, though, we see what avenues are open to us, whatever governmental system we happen to find ourselves. We'll look at that with Paul in Acts chapter 26. Next one. What U.S. president caused public concern due to his Catholic background? Andrew Jackson, Benjamin Harrison. Do you even know Benjamin Harrison was a president? He's one of those lesser-known guys. John Kennedy or Donald Trump? Kennedy. I found this on Kennedy's website. So the website for, the JFK Library, Museum, and all that. When he was, and some of you can fact check me because I wasn't alive when this happened. But I have people who can fact check me. That's the benefit. Kennedy was rolling. He was gaining a lot of momentum, and there was also a lot of public concern because of his Catholic background. There was the idea that if he became president, the Pope would then eventually hijack the United States, and that actually Kennedy was at the time building a tunnel from the White House to the Vatican. Kid you not. Kid you not. As far as I know, the tunnel isn't complete. Well, and here's the point, Dan. So you have this huge understanding. There were, and I did not know this, you can look it up on Kennedy's own, his own website. There were several Catholic bishops that wrote a letter saying he is not a Catholic because of his position on birth control. Not abortion, but still sexual freedom. You could live underneath the weird umbrella of reproductive rights, and that halted the momentum of his campaign. 69 million people voted at that election. Do you know how many votes he won by? 118,000. It was pretty close. And Kennedy himself said, I am not the Catholic candidate for president. I am the Democratic candidate for president. Now, love him or hate him, and we're not going to get into Kennedy's presidency, but this is not new. One more question. What worldview most significantly shaped the governmental structure of the United States? Judeo-Christian beliefs, the Enlightenment, moralistic therapeutic deism, which is a real thing, I did not make that up, or rationalism? Judeo-Christian, the Enlightenment, moralistic therapeutic deism, otherwise known as MTD, or rationalism? What do you think? I'm inclined to say A. A is the influential worldview, but the actual construction of the government was based on the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment at the time was it allowed itself, again, similar to what we just talked about earlier, the Enlightenment allowed itself to be open to having moralistic things brought into it. Because based off of reason, the Enlightenment came from rationalistic understanding. Basically, here's how things ought to work based on what is naturally assumed and should be known about the way things are constructed for good order. That provided the perfect playground for Judeo-Christian beliefs to operate in a way for the benefit of society as a whole, whether they were Jewish or Christian or whatever. But those were the paradigms. The Enlightenment provided the paradigm. This is why, and you can look at some of the documents, some of the founding fathers were deists, which means they understood there is a supreme being, but like Jefferson, like they're penknifing out parts of the Bible, it's like, oh, Jesus couldn't have been the Son of God. He was just a good moral teacher. Moralistic therapeutic deism basically means God exists so that your life goes well. So that's kind of where all that comes from. All right. I've kind of unpacked some of what the video had, so I'm going to skip ahead for the sake of time we'll go to this question. If God's main purpose for any country is to enforce law and order, protect the innocent, and punish lawbreakers, so that's the first part of the question. If that's God's point for how government should be put in there, look at Romans 13. What difference would it make if a country was Christian or not? Tim? Columbus, I don't know if Columbus has established anything. If you look, you could say, in terms of system of governing principles of individuals or organizational leadership, the presbytery of the Presbyterian Church probably shares some similarities with the Enlightenment. And there were Presbyterian presidents afterwards, but the Presbyterian influence, it doesn't come as early in the founding of the nation, in terms of the presidents at the time. So with this question, what difference would it make? If God has established government for the sole purpose of enforcing law and order, protecting innocent, and punishing lawbreakers, does it matter if the nation is Christian or not? Okay, so determining what law and order is, true. And someone's understanding. So a difference between West and East Germany. Right, so if you live in a theocracy, like an Islamic state, then how to define law and order and what those are to protect the innocent and punish lawbreakers. Sure, so you have the Ten Commandments, so we see that influence.
But it makes a huge difference because we see what difference it's making now because a lot of the country is becoming less and less Christian and things aren't getting better and better. So
So this is where you can see how both, there should be, there's a differentiation. They're different, they're distinct, but the influence is still there. Because if you have a system of government, and it's like, okay, law and order, well then what worldview is going to help you understand that? Because then you get into discussions of absolute truth. What's true? What's not? What's right? What's wrong? And again, this is where the Enlightenment held this as kind of giving the skeleton that Judeo-Christian beliefs are able to then inform and help further flesh out. And again, I mean, to the point of, even Islam being given as an example, please keep in mind that there is a huge spectrum of Islamic belief. You have some that are Muslim in name only, and they might follow some of like the fasting and some of the religious holidays. And then you have some where they take the Quran letter by letter, word by word. Now, friends, let's be honest. Does not Christianity have the same spectrum? I'm a Christian. You ever go to church? No, why would I do that? It's a waste of my Sunday. I go on Easter and Christmas because, it's kind of a big thing if you're going to be Christian. But there are the same things, so please keep that in mind. It will help tune your ears the right way as you have dialogue, and it will prevent you from assuming, and you all know what happens when we assume, but that would be recorded. So, moving on, we've kind of touched on that the pros and cons come out of America's religious freedom. What pros and cons? So the benefit, we get to have our worldview speak into things. What's the con to religious freedom? Other religions get to speak into it. And I think that's maybe where sometimes some Christians, they get a black eye. It's just like, well, my religious rights. And you have someone that comes up who, let's say, is across the spectrum of Muslim. They're like, what about my religious rights? Yours don't matter, mine do. Why? Because the founding fathers were Christians and you weren't. Go back to your country. Oh, that's a really mature, childlike God way to understand things, isn't it? Now, there are discussions. I don't mean to make light of the discussion in terms of don't have it, but the way we approach it probably needs to be a little more winsome and patient. And understanding this is going to take time. You're not going to have like the silver bullet, ping, there goes your argument. I'm right, you're wrong. Let's dismiss this and go to the next page. Please keep that in mind. It's not that simple. But I mean, the pro and con, the pro is like you get to exercise your religious belief. The con comes in, I think to your point, Dan, what happens if you have a devout Muslim and a devout Christian and their worldviews collide? Well, we don't believe the same thing, but we both have religious beliefs. That's where this system of government, it becomes very, very tricky. In terms of if you give religious freedom per, I'm going back here, the First Amendment, shall make no law respecting any establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. I mean, that's in a sense like the freedom the countries offer. Now, the sticky part comes in how do you negotiate all those differences? Carolyn. Difficulty with elections coming up. It's harder to find a middle even among other Christians when you look at the issues that you're voting on in terms of what people say. And that dialogue, I mean, to your point, that's very true, Carolyn. It's becoming difficult. And the last thing you want to do is start chucking Bible verses at each other like mud. But it becomes to the point where you have to start thinking, okay, this is going to take some time to unlearn and relearn and pick apart different discussions and different debates in terms of what does this mean. So you take abortion. You have some Christians that are okay with it. You have to be really patient. It's like, okay, can we talk about this? Like, what do you think abortion is? What do you mean by, what are your definitions? Why are those your definitions? What difference would it make if your definitions are right and mine are wrong? What difference would it make if mine were right and yours were wrong? The benefit, at least it should be, is that we should have this in common, but that's not even the case with some Christians. So labels are helpful to a point. So we end up having to discuss. I've got 4 more minutes just because I know the praise team has to have a few more things that they need to do prior service, so I told them I'd give them that time. So I want you to turn to Acts chapter 26. Acts chapter 26. I think our Bible study will probably just be a little staggered. I teach Bible study next week as well. So we'll be able to catch anything we miss. So Acts 26, to give you a little bit of context here. Let's get past here. So these verses specifically, so verses 1 to 3 and 19 to 32. So Agrippa said to Paul, so Paul is being tried. He's under trial. That's the context. So you think about those circles, those concentric circles of understanding the story that you're reading, because we're dropping right in the middle of Acts. Paul is under trial. He's gone from different type of governmental leaders, from a governor to a king. So then King Agrippa said to Paul, you have permission to speak for yourself. So this is how the system of government is set up, where Paul's at the time. Paul motioned with his hand and began his defense. King Agrippa, I consider myself fortunate to stand before you today. He's not glad-handing, as I make my defense against all the accusations of the Jews, and especially so because you are well acquainted with all the Jewish customs and controversies. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently. What Paul basically says is he says to King Agrippa, this is the system of government that's in place. He hasn't given any gospel presentation yet. And what he's basically said is, King, you are aware of the issues of your people. Now, keep in mind, this is a very small nation. So he should have advisors of some sort. Letting him. So Paul's like, I'm in this mess, and you're aware of it. I thank you for the opportunity to explain myself. Now, there's a whole lot Paul says. We're going to jump to verse 19. Basically what Paul does, he gives his gospel story. It's like, here's what happened to me on the road. I'm a very zealous Jew. Jesus interrupted my life, changed it. Verse 19. So then, King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the vision from heaven. This is one he got from Jesus. First to those in Damascus, then to those in Jerusalem, and in all Judea, and then to the Gentiles. I preached that they should repent and turn to God and demonstrate their repentance by their deeds. That is why some Jews seized me in the temple courts and tried to kill me. But God has helped me to this very day, so I stand here and testify to small and great alike. I am saying nothing beyond what the prophets and Moses said would happen, that the Messiah would suffer and as the first to rise from the dead, would bring the message of light to his own people and to the Gentiles. Now keep in mind, up to this point, Agrippa has this background. He might be a puppet of the Roman Empire at the time, but this is part of his story. So Paul is aware of that. So he's using not only the governmental system, but the awareness of the person that's there. He's using that to proclaim the gospel, not to prove that he's right. At this point, Festus, who's another governmental official, interrupted Paul's defense. You're out of your mind, Paul, he shouted. Your great learning is driving you insane. He's basically saying, prove yourself legally and stop talking about Jesus. It's only going to get you in trouble. I'm not insane, most excellent Festus, Paul replied. What I am saying is true and reasonable. The king is familiar with these things, and I can speak freely to him. I'm convinced that none of this has escaped his notice because it was not done in a corner. So in other words, this is a public issue. Paul's kind of bringing up something that everybody's talking about. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you do. Then Agrippa said to Paul, do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian? That's not the question that Paul asked. But Agrippa can sense what would happen. Paul replied, short time or long, I pray to God that not only you, but all who are listening to me today might become what I am, except for these chains. So it's like, I want you all to follow Jesus. I don't want you all to be in chains for it, but I want you all to follow him. The king rose, and with him the governor and Bernice and those sitting with them. After they left the room, they began saying to one another, "This man is not doing anything that deserves death or imprisonment." Agrippa said to Festus, "This man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar." Paul put himself in a position where he might be imprisoned, but he understood that even through his imprisonment, there's opportunity to share the gospel, so he didn't avoid it. He's not being belligerent. He's being honest. He's operating within the system, because if you look earlier in this story, Paul's about to be punished or disciplined, and once they find out he's a Roman citizen, they're like, "Oh, please don't tell anybody, because they'll kill us if we harm a Roman citizen." Paul understood his citizenship. He was a Jew who became a Christian. He understood his identity as a child of God, and he also understood he's a Roman. How can I use this for the benefit of the gospel, not for the benefit of saving my own skin? Now, I understand if me saying that now, maybe like, "Pastor, 15 years from now, are you okay if you're in jail for this?" That's something I got to reckon with. But not just me, because that's all of us. Now, I'm not saying this to frighten you. Remember your primary citizenship. I have to end here, and I know it's not exactly a comfortable, yay, go into the week type of Bible study. I also, friends, don't want to avoid these topics, as thorny as they might be, and we might not have a clean-cut answer to it, but that's why it's more than just 1 week. So next week we'll keep unpacking this more in terms of how do we navigate this intersection as disciples of Jesus, as children of God that happen to live in our country, and how do we make use of our freedoms for the gospel's benefit. Let's pray. Father, we have questions, and as a result of being together, we might have even more questions right now, but we still recognize the truths that you give to us, primarily as children of God, that you are Lord of all. And we see that as the Creator, you've put government in place for the benefit of all people, and we know that there are those who don't understand that that's why it's there. So may you make us winsome and wise and creative in our conversations and how we communicate about this. May you embolden our faith. May we find even our anger, may it dissipate in the peace that you bring, understanding that you work all things together for your good, for good of those you've called, and we might not see that full end, but you already know it. So we submit ourselves to you as King, and place ourselves in your hands for you to continue to mold and shape and guide. In your name we pray. Amen. Thanks for your attention. More fun to come next week.